Hello everyone, Mama Peas here. I thought it would be fun to see what we were doing during this COVID-19 quarantine, and we decided we were going to work on our garden. Now we actually haven't installed our garden yet, even though we have lived here for about 7 years, just because we haven't gotten around to it, and we've had a lot of landscaping to do. As you can see, everything you see here, we actually did ourselves. So we did the chicken coop last year and the shed the year before and the herb garden a while ago. But this year we are focusing on putting together our garden. And we decided after much deliberation that the way that we wanted to do our garden was to put in raised beds. Well, this process is a lot more involved than we thought, but it has been so fun to do all of our research and come up with new and interesting ways to put together the irrigation and how do we want to design the layout. And it's been really fun, especially having my husband home with me, because it makes, adventures way more fun when you have someone doing it with you. So we're kind of in the middle of doing our garden beds, and I'm gonna show you how our next garden bed is going to be installed. And I'm very excited because it's the portion of my garden where I get to install trellises, and I've never done trellises before. I learned a little bit about gardening in a completely different method. So my experience in gardening is very not at all raised garden beds. So my experience is in pretty much the opposite of raised garden beds, and that is trench gardening on the ground with mulch and plastic and letting things sprout out. And I don't even put my tomatoes on trellises. So when we decided to do raised bed garden boxes, it is a completely new territory for me. So I have done a lot of research, and whether or not this is the best way, I do not know, but this is how we are going to do it, and I wanted to share it with you. So get ready, hold on to your hats. You're going to find out how Mama Peas does her raised bed gardening, and we'll see what happens. Okay. The first thing that we did before we did anything else is we measured the whole space that we had for our garden, and then we put it out on paper. We decided to install our raised beds in a particular formation that made it easy for us to access it from the house, and also to still have enough room to move our wheelbarrow through. So we made our decisions kind of how we laid it out based on those main two factors. I wanted to be able to use the walkways. That was the big problem with me, is I didn't want to have walkways. I'm used to trench gardening, and all you do for trench gardening is you walk in the trench. The reason that we decided to do raised beds is because we wanted our yard to look nice and put together. But since the quarantine, since we all started to have to stay at home and there were runs on the grocery store, our priorities changed just a little bit about what projects we were going to do and how we were going to do our garden. So we started thinking about how can we create as much food as possible in the little space that we have, and in the little space that we had. So I started looking into what it meant to do vertical gardening, because I'm told that you can get a good yield of food in especially raised gardens when you work with vertical gardening. So I am now a vertical gardener. I'm going to have to learn all of those tips and tricks and see which works best. Now we're in the Utah area, and so a lot of the videos online were not terribly helpful. They were sort of helpful, but I found that in Utah, it's a very different climate than Pennsylvania and California and a lot of other climates like that. So I had to take the information that I was collecting online and apply it to our climate here. And since I'm an experienced gardener, then I'm hoping that I have made the right choice and I'm applying what I know to this raised bed garden. So here's what we decided to do. Our first garden space, we decided to kind of make an L shape, and I'll show you a little bit more later. And I wanted this shape to kind of outline my whole garden. We wanted to create as much space as we could while still being able to access every part of it. My online research tells me that I don't want beds that are wider than 4 feet because I want to be able to access it. From all sides, and my husband wanted to make sure that they were tall enough that he didn't have to do a lot of bending over. Well, since I'm the gardener and I'm used to bending over a lot, it wasn't a big deal to me, but to him it was a big deal, and so that's why we did it. So we have raised these beds up. They're 22 inches tall, and they vary in their lengths, but they're all 22 inches tall and they all are 4 feet wide. So we did a little L shape here, and we decided to do 3 different beds right next to each other in this L shape so that I can put in my perennial garden, and that includes berries. Just berries. I love berries. I love eating berries. I love planting berries. I love harvesting berries, and my children love it too, and I have 9 children. And we just go through those berries so fast. So I wanted to create a berry garden that was accessible and easy to get to, but I had enough yield that it actually fed my family. And hopefully it will give me enough that I can actually store some things. So we made our garden beds with redwood. The reason we did this is we wanted it to last as long as we could. I was thinking about 10 years plus, and redwood does a good job of doing that. And it's readily available in the stores here in Utah. So we did our garden boxes in redwood. And then I treated it with linseed oil, which helps protect it just a little bit longer. It helps it kind of age more slowly, and it helps protect the wood. After I treated all of my wood with linseed oil, then I put them together, and I will show you how I put them together now. But before I go into that, so this longer bed, this is the longest bed right here. This is 11 feet, and yes, we did 11 feet, not 12 feet. And the only reason that we did that is because we just ran out of space. If we could have helped it, we would have made it 12 feet because they come in 12-foot lengths or 10-foot lengths. But silly us, we planned our garden bed, then we installed the curbing, which is new this year, and lo and behold, after we installed the curbing, then we realized that we didn't quite have enough space, and we wanted to have enough space in the walkways that we could put a wheelbarrow through, and we discovered that a wheelbarrow fits great in about 32 inches or more, and our wheelbarrow in particular. And so what we want to do eventually, phase 2 of the garden, is to put caps, sitting caps on. I'm calling them sitting caps, but really they're just caps. They're for looks mostly, and a little bit of a convenience for me to sit on. So when I sit on my bed to pick things from my garden, I am more comfortable. Right now it's really only comfortable on the corners, but that's okay. It's not necessary. You can still function without them, but that is my future plans. So I made these beds 4 feet wide, and this one is 11 feet long. My other 2 beds here are 4 feet wide and 8 feet long. And then all we did is we just took 4x4, put it in each corner, and attached those boards to the corners. Then what we did is we installed, and I loved this suggestion, we just installed bracing ties. The longer boxes, anything 8 feet or more, we installed bracing ties. And on my 11-foot bed, I installed them 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's just to kind of help the boards stay together. And I got some that were 27 inches long, so I was able to stake them in the ground a little bit just to give it a little bit more stability instead of just having it on top. It just made me feel better. I didn't feel like I needed to do any other staking. But having those ties in the ground helped me feel better about its stability. Just in case, who knows? So I installed this bed, and I put then the next step, after we installed the bed, after I made the beds, treated with linseed oil, then my husband, a great man as he went and he leveled the ground so that it was all nice and level. And the reason that we wanted to make sure the ground was level where our garden box goes is just so that the water doesn't tend to flow to one side. And it helps your boxes last a little bit longer, and it's better for your plants. So he leveled the ground. He was in charge of that, which I was grateful for. I like to build rather than to move dirt. After he leveled the dirt, we all carried the box over and placed it in there and got our levels out on one side. After we got the garden boxes placed and leveled off, we decided to install black plastic on the inside. Now, my gardening experience in the past has told me that that dirt has a tendency to break down plastic. I used black plastic that is 6 millimeters thick, and I got this in the painting section of the hardware store. And I use that because it does a great job of staying together. You can reuse it for a couple of years afterwards because it's nice and thick, and it does a good job. We decided to attach the black plastic to the inside of the garden bed. We just stapled it on. And this is in an effort just to keep water away from the wood as long as possible. The redwood will do fine without doing the black plastic, but that was what we did, just to help preserve and make it last a little bit longer. So after we installed the black plastic, then it was time to put in the soil. The soil is the most important part of what contributes to a healthy garden. And so I know this from my training in the past is how important soil is. So I knew that we needed to make sure that the soil was good all the way up. Once we got our soil in, it was time to plant our plants. And in this box, I planted raspberries. They're my favorite thing to plant. And we'll talk more about the kind of plants that you can plant and what area of the garden they'll go in and how your sunlight looks. But that is basically the overview of how I built my garden boxes. Now let me give you some details. As you can see, I have my latest box that we have been working on installed. It's been leveled and placed, and we've put our strap ties in the garden box, and we've put our black plastic around. And we've added a little bit of soil. The way that I do my soil is a little bit different than a lot of online videos and places have said to do their soil for garden boxes, raised garden beds. I have chosen to do a more natural way of planting. Plants do very well with very good soil, and every good soil needs aeration, it needs natural soil, and it needs compost. And compost basically means broken down organic material. And this organic material is key, especially in places like Utah that has very alkaline, clayous soil. So in order for me to be able to bring the soil at the level where it really needs to be, which is not clayous, it's more of a loam. That means that you can tell if soil is clayous if you squeeze it and when it's slightly wet and it kind of stays together. Actually, it will, in my soil, it will do that even when it's dry. So my goal is to get it to be loamy. When I squeeze it together, it falls apart a little bit, okay? I want it to be loamy, and I want it to be rich, and I want it to have a lot of organic material in it. You also want a pH of about 6 or 7, a slightly acidic pH. We in Utah have about a 7 or an 8. In my particular area, we have about an 8. So let's talk about the soil. Why do I do it like this? Well, first you need to understand something about plants. The rooting system for plants do not just go for a couple of inches under the soil. Plants have an amazing microsystem of roots that come through and penetrate areas that you don't even know that they penetrate. So and different plants root differently. There are shallow rooted plants such as your berries and your spring crops like lettuce and spinach and radishes. They have a very short rooting system. But when we say short, we mean that it goes maybe a couple of feet into the ground at most. And really, that is quite a lot more than you would think. When you pull that plant out, the roots only look about that big, but really they're actually a lot more extensive than we can see. A lot of those little roots and little hairs are growing into the soil a lot more deep than we give them credit for. So we water those shallow plants a little differently. We water them more often because their greater root system is higher up in the soil. So I have organized my garden according to their watering needs. So I have my perennial garden, which is my berries, which are watered shallowly. They are watered about twice a week for about an hour at a time. This bed is my deep rooters. This bed includes tomatoes and squash and watermelon and those kinds of vines. They're pretty much all vines. And so I know, now these ones, they root very, very deeply. In fact, some tomato plants are known to root as deep as 10 feet. So I very purposely did not put any kind of barrier on the bottom of my raised beds because I want those roots to go just as deep as they possibly can. And in order for them to want to do that, I need to have my soil blended together, and I need to have a lot of very nutritious elements that exist in this soil. So what I did is I have taken the natural soil, I have put some aeration on top of that, okay, and that could be lava rocks. I chose to do straw. You could do really broken down pieces of wood, whatever works for you, some kind of aeration. So you have your natural soil, then you have your aeration level, and then on top of that, I have compost. You can choose to do compost any way that you want to. You can make your own compost. You can go to the store and get some compost. My neighbor over there goes over to the dump and picks up the compost that they make over there. You can just get some manure in a bag, and that's okay too. Any kind of compost, which is broken down organic material that contains a lot of nutrients. Okay, so those are my 3 elements that I do, and what I have to make sure that I do is I have to till them or mix them together. You can shovel them together, you can till them. I went and got a tiller this year because I knew I was going to be using a lot of tilling. So I have those 3 elements, I mix them together, and then I do it again. Natural soil, aeration, compost, mix them together. Now, in addition to that, I do like to put some chemicals in there, but my form of chemicals are slow release fertilizer. I use, in my soil, we are very alkaline, so I use sulfur. So I actually go natural soil, fertilizer, aeration, and compost. And that is my mixture for a really great soil. Let me give you a few more details about how I mix together this fertilizer. And I got this from a guy named Gordon Wells. I took a class from him, and I have found that this mixture works very well with gardens. So this mixture is 16-16-8 mixed with ironite, and you mix it together 4/5 16-16-8 and 1/5 ironite, and I mix it together in a 5-gallon bucket, and I take a scoop and I sprinkle it on, kind of like how you would salt a steak. The actual amount that you would use would be about 1 quart per 180 square feet. I have found that if I salt it like I would my steak, that's about right. Then I use slow release sulfur, and that is just in an effort to bring the pH level of my soil down because I have very alkaline soil and I want it to be more acidic. In other areas of the world, you would not want to use that because you already have very acidic soil and the sulfur would not help you at all. So they use other things in order to bring up their acidity, and it's not so acidic. So that's what I use, and then you put the part for sulfur it's 2 quarts per 180 square feet. I'll put the link to his website in the comments or the notes below. Anyway, so this sulfur, you add 2 parts per 180 square feet, and I found that's a really heavy salting. And something maybe on this, so if you were to salt your steak with that, it would taste very salty. So that's kind of how I look at how to put the sulfur in my box. So after I put all of those things together, I till it up. The reason that you want to till your layers together is because if you don't, then once that root gets to one layer that's different than the mixture that it's in, it will actually, instead of penetrating through it, it will kind of curl around and just stay up in the level where it was before. That's just how roots work. So if you till it together, then even if you have a slightly different variation, as long as they're blended together from one layer to another, then those roots will desire to go further down. I actually put my fertilizer deeper in the soil as well, especially for these deep rooted plants, because I want to kind of, it's like offering them a little bit of candy when they go a little further. And that's just my idea. I don't know if it will actually work because I've never done raised garden beds, but I have an opportunity to encourage my roots to go a little bit deeper, and so I'm going to take it. And I'm excited to try it to see if it actually helps. So that's how I mix my soil. I mix it up until I get to the level that I want, which is usually about 3-4 inches from the top. You can go all the way up if you want to. I just didn't want anything falling out. Plus I plan on mulching the top of it. So I chose to do about 3 or 4 inches from the top. So that's how I do soil. The first thing you want to do when preparing your garden box is to treat your wood if you're going to. Now with the redwood, you don't actually have to treat it. You can just put it up like normal. No matter what you do, it will gray, and we've decided we like the gray and it's okay. But we also decided that we wanted to treat the wood with just a linseed oil coating. Linseed oil is very, very easy. All you do is you put it on a cloth of some kind. I just use some of my rags, which are a type of terry cloth. I just put them on my rags and I rub it into the wood, and it's amazing the transformation that takes place in that wood because it becomes so beautiful. Now I know that beauty is only going to last for a year or 2, maybe even 3, but I'm okay with that, and I know that ahead of time, and so it's okay. So I'm going to walk you through the process of how I treat this wood. It's really quite straightforward and simple, but there's a couple of tricks that I have discovered that I think might be helpful to you. First of all, linseed oil stains cement a little bit. You have to, it's not as bad as something with an actual stain in it. I like to keep a cloth underneath my linseed oil as I'm working with it because I have found that the oil seeps into the concrete and I have to clean it with a with a paint thinner. So I use a cloth on the bottom just to help prevent that. I also decided to start using my my glass table here that's falling apart so I can access it easily and it doesn't fall onto the concrete. Yes, I have found that out the hard way. So I put my linseed oil just on my rag. I just pour it on just like this. And I dripped. I always drip. I don't know what my deal is. I like to rub it into my cloth here. And you can use rubber gloves or leather gloves. I have used both. Just know that it will tend to treat your leather gloves also. And that's okay. These are my work gloves. I don't really care how they look. So when I rub into this, and as you can see, I've already done this much so far. I want to point out these knots that are down here. The knots have a tendency to suck up more oil. So you just have to make sure you have a good amount of oil on your cloth in order to be able to rub in all of those little cracks. Also, wood is not always perfectly clean, especially if you have to leave it outside for a few days like me, and then it gets rained on, or birds drop poop, or something like that. Kids come and walk on it. Just know that it will rub out and it will wear out, and it's okay if there's a little bit of mistakes on there. So then you just rub it, you put it on and you rub it in, and I just make sure to go around these knots really well. And I love how it looks. I love how the knots stand out in kind of a reddish tone. And you just keep rubbing until you either run out of linseed oil or until you finish. And I do each of the 4 sides. Now I have to do a little bit of trimming, and so I am not doing the edges, the ends of the board right now because I know I'm gonna have to trim it anyway. But just so you know, when you do the ends of the boards, they're big oil hogs. It just sucks up that oil really fast, and so you will need to put more oil on the ends. And actually it won't suck up as much if you cut it into a straight line. When they come from the store, they're kind of a rough cut on the edge, and when you cut it with your miter saw, it works a lot better at not taking up so much oil. I'm running out of oil really fast. So then when I do my boards, I just kind of go around in a circumference, and I do one side, and then the sides of the board, and then the back side, and then I set it aside and work on the next board. You'll notice that the linseed oil will work its way into the wood. So when you first put it on, it actually is not that dark, but as it sits, it actually gets darker and darker, and it really gets pretty. You will notice the difference between this side and this side is quite different. I love the way that linseed oil brings out redwood. So yeah, I'm just gonna put it on time lapse and finish up all of my boards. I have a whole lot to do today, so we're gonna see what we can do. I want to just mention a few more things about the wood and the type of wood and some other problems that you might run into when preparing this wood. The redwood, what you want to do is when you go to the hardware store, you want to make sure that you have nice and straight slats of wood. It's especially important for your longer boxes. I find anything longer than 8 feet really needs to be straight on. Though the strap ties do actually help to make that not such a big deal, it is still very important that you make sure they're not twisty, because your boxes need to be completely square, at least as best you can do it, because not all wood is perfect. But you want to try to make it as perfect as you can, and that's all you can do. So when I go to the hardware store, I look down the line when it's laying flat, and I look down the line when it's standing upright on its side, so that I know if it's straight or not. And you would be surprised how many pieces of wood that are just not straight. It's actually kind of frustrating. During COVID-19, I'm finding that I am wanting to order online and just go and pick it up, because that's really easy. But the problem with that is that I'm not absolutely certain that the wood that I'm going to get is straight, and I really need my garden boxes to be straight. So I go myself, I put on the mask and everything, and I get there and I look down the barrel of my redwood. Now, as far as type of redwood goes, this is common redwood. It's used in common construction redwood is actually what it's called. It is suggested in another video that I watched that you use the Heart brand of redwood, and they have the orange tags at Home Depot, but I couldn't find those anywhere at my Home Depot, so I just grabbed what they had. I have noticed that the Top Choice brand at Lowe's are pretty good quality ones, as long as you're not the last one to go through all of the pieces of redwood. Because there have been several trips that I have made where I'm scraping the barrel trying to get the last stuff, and I just can't even find enough, and so I end up having to go to multiple stores, and it's really annoying. So find some redwood, and maybe don't wait to do your redwood boxes in April and May. Try to go February and March and do your garden boxes. Then maybe you'll have more of a selection than I did. But I'm trying to do the best I can, and it still looks great, and I'm very excited. So as you can see, this redwood piece is finished, but there's a couple of things that I wanted to point out. So I need to bring the camera a little bit closer in order for you to understand what I'm saying. So you will see on this piece, this board right here, there are a lot of little chalk marks, and I actually think this is construction crayon that has rubbed off on these boards. You can especially see it over here. And these are, I try not to get pieces like that, but if I'm going to err, I decided to err on the side of making sure it was straight instead of if it was perfectly clean. I ended up ultimately deciding that it really wasn't that big of a deal. They were going to gray and weather anyway, no matter what board I chose. So I have found that most of the marks that I have problems with rub off when I'm applying my linseed oil. This one did not, however, and I'm just going to put that on the inside portion that's going to be covered with dirt, and no one will see it anyway. So yay! Problem solved. The other thing I wanted to say is when you are applying linseed oil, you're putting it on your cloth, you're rubbing it in, just make sure there's not drips anywhere. You just want to rub out all of those drips. It will soak into the wood somewhat, even if you have a few drips. I have just found that it makes for a cleaner workspace and it doesn't end up staining one area a little bit more than another. One of the reasons I chose to use the cloth rather than a paintbrush was because I could control how evenly it went on or not than I could with a paintbrush, which had a tendency to be more liney. Stripy. We'll go with stripy. So it tends to be a little bit more stripy. So the last thing I wanted to mention is your gloves. Please make sure you wear gloves. I tried to do this several times without wearing any gloves, and I got so many splinters. I mean, this wood is pretty easy to work with. You want to rub into the grain toward the direction of the grain. Which is pretty simple because they're long boards, but I have found how important it is for me to have gloves, any gloves, like rubber gloves. You could use, I'm using leather gloves currently, and I just found that there are usually pieces that on some boards that will just kind of flake off, especially if you are trying to scrape the bottom of the barrel in the selections at the hardware store like me. And they're not a big deal. You just put them on the inside of your box and nobody sees it, and it perfectly functions. The other thing I do want to mention is when you are selecting your boards, make sure first that they're straight, but also make sure they don't have any major cracks. A little crack that goes about, a 1/4 of an inch into the wood is not a big deal. If it goes all the way through the wood and then you can see it throughout the rest of the board, it means eventually that board will crack. So just try to avoid those cracks. Little cracks are okay, long cracks bad. So I just wanted to mention that. Now I'm going to go ahead and finish the rest of my boards.